Tonight, I'll be introducing Daniel Menaker. He is and has been an essayist, novelist, editor, humorist, and more currently a professor. He's won 2 O. Henry Awards for short fiction, and his novel, The Treatment, was a New York Times notable book described by Publisher Weekly as a triumphant satire of Freudianism gone amok. He served as a fiction editor for The New Yorker for 20 years until 1995, when Random House stole him to be a senior literary editor. Within due time, he ascended to executive editor-in-chief. Over the years, he worked with acclaimed authors such as Salman Rushdie, David Foster Wallace, George Saunders, Elizabeth Strout, and the recent Nobel laureate Alice Munro, along with many, many more. His works have appeared in The New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Harper's, The Atlantic, and other journals and newspapers. He has also published Friends and Relations, a collection of short stories, Old Left, A Good Talk, The Story and Skill of Conversation, and recently his memoir, My Mistake. As Kirkus puts it in a starred review, Menaker doesn't just recount experiences, he digs away at them with wit and astute reflection. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Daniel Menaker.
There's the publisher at Random House when I first arrived was named Alberto Vitali, and he had been the head of Olivetti in Italy. And why he was the publisher at Random House, I'm not sure, but I do know that one of the reasons he left Olivetti is that when computers started being important and people were doing word processing on them instead of the typewriters that Olivetti made, Alberto was sure that there was no future in computers at all. So that was the end of that. And he would say in the halls to me, now, see, Stony Brook has made his dreams for me come true. He would say, Professore. I wasn't a professor. Yeah, Professore, he says, it's time to move some units. We have to move the units. So, and he was right. We tried to move. We tried to move a lot of units. That's what publishing's about. So I'm now really a professor, and I wish I could see Alberto again so that he would call me Professore, and I would say, that's me. Thanks to Bob Reeves. Thanks to everybody here for having me out here. I'm sorry Dwight isn't here. He's a wonderful reviewer, a very funny guy, and maybe we can get him another time. I have a suspicion about why he's not here, but I'm not going to say what it is. No, I can't say what it is. He says that he's not feeling well. I thought what I'd do, since I think most of us share a misplaced idolatry for the New Yorker, I thought actually it's not misplaced. I like to say that, but I went to the archives at the New York Public Library, which has all the New Yorker's correspondence and galleys and editing and letters from everybody to everybody. And I was trying to be very ironic about the magazine and sort of an insider who was an outsider. And I started looking through the files and there are almost 900 feet end to end of cartons just from something like 12 years. That's 3 football fields. And each one of these cartons, I've seen them, is packed with artifacts and documents of the most sort of puzzling kind. And there's a big index at the beginning, and it says all these names that you've heard. You've heard Nabokov, you've heard Sylvia Townsend Warner, you've heard Alice Munro, you've heard John O'Hara, you've heard John Cheever, you've heard everybody. And then in the middle of one of these lists, it said Phyllis Diller. And I thought, what is Phyllis Diller doing in there? And I never found out. But what I'm saying is, it was so frightening that it also disarmed my irony. It is a great magazine. It always has been. And it now has a kind of cultural central place of its own. And so I can't be too funny about it. I thought what I'd do, although I do have some funny stuff in the book about working there. And they did try to fire me at one point. So that was very amusing too. So I thought what I'd do is read a couple of documents that I kept. I probably shouldn't have, but I did, to show you the kind of locutions and tone of the place when I was there. So the first one is a book blurb, you know, those little in briefs that the New Yorker has, that never ran. But it's here, it's in galley proof. I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to read to you a comment that one of the editors made. So it says, Sailing by Susan Kenny, Viking, $18.95. This story about a husband's long dying allows for a whole book of scenes of noble suffering, brave smiles, and cursing despair. Minus the backdrop of the inevitable tragedy, what you are in fact reading is technico-false poetic panegyrics about sailing and descriptions of house cleaning and visits to doctors spaced out with exposition thinly disguised as reminiscent musing on how the principals got where they are. Grad school at Cornell, teaching jobs in Maine, and tumors called pheochromocytomas, if you want to know about that kind of thing. Phil would just as soon give in to the negative first verdicts of doctors, but Sarah is determined not to let him. If sentimentality is loving your characters more than God would, which is a great line, I have to say, Ms. Kenny fills the bill with frequent tender looks through Phil's eyes at her heroine's, quote, cheeks reddened by the wind, her hair all blown about in wisps, a fuzzy aureole around her face. And the final leave-taking is so drawn out, it might be a death in a grand opera. In opera, however, the music can make even agony a treat. The writing here is just agony. Being of the solemn and literal school that loads on metaphor in hope of turning reportage into art. So that was the blurb that never ran. This was written in 1988, which was 2 years after William Shawn left and Robert Gottlieb, who had been editor at a publisher at Knopf, came to be editor of the New Yorker. And Shawn and Bob was very willing, more than willing, to run this kind of super snide criticism in any cultural field. So here's the note from one of the editors. It's addressed to Charles McGrath, who was deputy editor and a colleague of mine for many years and went on to work at the Times as editor of the Book Review. Chip, why would we single out this particular novel by this particular not very well-known writer to treat with such extreme scorn and derision? It's using our always limited book space to beat up on somebody. We've never done this, and it runs contrary to our whole idea around here. We can't seem to find space to mention all the books worth noting or worth reviewing, and the only good side of that, to me, is that we can simply ignore the books we don't really care for, unless there's a particular reason for writing something pointed about some particular writer or particular book. This looks personal, and it makes us look shabby. And that's from Roger Angell, who was a colleague of mine and a baseball writer, as you probably know, still with us at the age of 94 and still working at the New Yorker. So that's a little behind the scenes stuff having to do with the transition between one editor and the next. The other little document I have, and I got a million of them. I mean, it's scary, this stuff. This is a note to me from Michael Arlen, who was the television critic at the New Yorker for a long time, and the author of a wonderful memoir about his family, which was an Armenian family. But he was just sort of a very well-respected man about the office. He wrote Talk of the Town, and I believe he was the son of Harold Arlen, and I'm not sure about that. The composer, the Broadway guy, right? Anyway, Dear Dan, he says, There is a foolish person by the name of Mikhailo Vukachevich who lives in Spain, fortunately, and claims to be a friend of my family's, and who sends me stories that I politely decline on the part of the magazine on account of their foolishness, but who now apparently feels that I am standing in his way, preventing greater intimacy and cutting down on story sales of his with the editorial staff. And so, short of sending him a letter bomb myself, which I don't have to send, or even short of telling him to go away, I have taken the coward's way out and have told him and his foolish stories to go to D. Menaker, Esquire. Thanks a lot, you say. Yes, I know. I agree. But think of it this way. He's not at least a friend of your family's. Though, come to think of it, there is always that possibility, and perhaps he and you will hit it off famously. He will come over from Spain and have Thanksgiving dinners and so on. Also, you have a secretary, or certainly should have one, or maybe two, if the people here are treating you right, and she can handle the Vukachevich correspondence without your even knowing about it. Also, possibly, I am dead wrong about the Vukachevich oeuvre, a word he is terrifically fond of. And he and you, quite aside from Thanksgiving dinner, will forge one of those Maxwell Perkins Tom Wolfe bonds, or was it Fitzgerald? I forget. People will say Vukachevich was nothing, unknown outside of Spain, and of course Arlen's family, until Menaker took him over. So think of it as my loss and your gain. Regards, Michael Arlen. It was such fun, I have to tell you. I feel so lucky. I didn't quite realize in a way, because I was always complaining, as everybody does. But the days in a way were golden because the advertising was so thick. So we could afford to screw around and write funny letters to each other. And it wasn't a grindhouse the way many publications and many publishing houses are. There's no time to get in trouble or, mess about. Or Chip McGrath used to rollerblade through the halls because we had these really long halls, and that doesn't happen anymore. I don't know. I mean, I don't think Remnick runs that kind of shop. So then I thought, this is the book, my mistake. This is a sneak preview. It doesn't substitute for Dwight Garner, but you say yes, it does. And so I thought I would read a few things more about the New Yorker, just little snippets, and then maybe we can have a Q&A. And, as that kind introduction, thank you very much, said, I've done a lot of different stuff, and I assume many of you are writers, and if there's any questions I can answer for you, besides why you want to be a writer, which is maybe the main question, I'd be glad to. So these are little the whole book is organized by age, and like the first section says 3 months because I was told a story about my infancy often, and then the next one is 2.5 because I do have my first very strong recollection from then, which was confirmed by my parents and so on. So it's like, it's for the internet age. It's bites. Near the end, I think actually that did influence me in the way I wrote it, because at first it was just a narrative saying, and then, after graduate school, and now I've just chopped it all up for modern consumption. So this is, the age bracket is 34. I have been asked to leave the magazine a couple of years earlier, but I hung on and I sort of slinked around and hid in the men's room so they couldn't throw me out. I was never fired. They said, look for another job. you don't have to leave. That was their mistake. But we want you to look for another job. And I did. And like I got a job at Saturday Review, but it folded the next week. So that wasn't a good sign. And then I got some copy editing offer for, I swear, something like plumbing and heating newsletter or something. And I'd rather die. I mean, I did look for a job, but so let's see. At the New Yorker, there are editors and writers, and then there's everyone else. Most of us who haven't made peace with copy editing or fact-checking for the foreseeable future want to be one or both of the former. There isn't much room, especially with so many desperados jostling each other in the halls as staff writers, and with editors, once they have landed in their coveted chairs, almost never getting up again. And the other aging, flying Dutchman types who grayly haunt the corridors, hoping that a piece they wrote about Indonesian metallurgy 2 years earlier might yet see the light of publication day. At some point, when I am still in trouble, this leprous period, this untouchability, it lasts for about 3 years, I ask to see Mr. Shawn to try somehow to regain his good graces. I am sitting in his office on the couch to the side of his desk. He turns his chair to face me. I notice that I have sunk way down into the couch, and although I'm about 8 inches taller than Shawn is, I'm looking up at him. Tom Wolfe described the same subsiding cushion phenomenon in his New York Magazine piece about the New Yorker called Tiny Mummies. After I plead my case, Shawn says to me quietly, "Mr. Menaker, you could go anywhere else and be a star." And distaste fairly drips from the last word. Another time, with me still supposedly on my way out, and really and truly trying to find another job, when I ask about writing a piece about the college I went to, Swarthmore, Mr. Shawn says to me, "Well, I really don't mean to criticize you. I don't expect people, even the people who work here, to understand these matters and these distinctions. But what you want to write is an article. And the New Yorker doesn't publish articles." No diminutive has ever sounded smaller. There is a whole list of words Shawn hates, some of which someone has fashioned into this sentence. Locating his gadget at the urinal, Tom Wolfe saw a photo of the intriguing, balding tycoon. The woman's undergarment word teddy, which occasionally appears in the column On and Off the Avenue, drives Shawn particularly crazy. "Isn't there some other word to describe this piece of clothing?" he asks in his tiny handwriting in the margin of a piece. He uses variations to register this objection repeatedly, as in, "Can't we find another way to refer to this?" And "Must we include this word? There has to be a way around it." I'm still working as a copy editor at the New Yorker. I've hung on, and since I started writing short stories and humor for the magazine, the authorities appear to be tolerating me instead of shunning me. This is purgatory, I guess. I have just co-written and published The Worst, a parody of a bestseller called The Best, which is a list book of the best stereo, the best wine, the best this, the best that. Our worst wine is Switchblade. Our worst mammal is Jimmy's Taper. Our worst ice cream flavor is I'm a Lima Sherbet. My co-writer is Charles Chip McGrath, who has recently arrived at the magazine as a copy editor. We work in the same crummy office. For some reason, Chip and I are both in the hall just outside copy editing when Roger Angell, the best baseball writer in the world, the legend in his own time editor, who works on most of the magazine's humor, and the hater, I can't refer to that because it's, no, and on most of the magazine's humor, is walking toward us with a pained expression on his face. He's holding a piece of paper in his right hand, flapping it up and down. "Sorry, guys," he says. "I really hoped that something like this would never happen." "What did we do?" He said, What do we do, I say, still on edge because of the trouble I have gotten into and my precarious position. It's just a rule we have, Roger says. I'm afraid you have to return the payment for that humor piece, the worst. He flaps the piece of paper up and down some more. But why, Chip says. It's just a rule. You couldn't have known about it, but you do have to return the payment. I'm really sorry. What rule, I say? Roger holds the paper still for us so that we can read it. The rule is that any writer has to return the payment for a first humor piece when the magazine receives a fan letter about it from Groucho Marx. He laughs. Chip and I pass the letter between us. Roger goes away, chuckling. When we go back to our office, we decide to flip a coin for possession of the physical letter, and I win. It says we're as good as S.J. Perelman, a writer I have never found at all funny. But by God, I will take it. More pranks. Pauline Kael, the New Yorker's movie critic, is always trying to provoke Sean with her rowdy language. He has asked me to let him know if there is anything we might find offensive in the copy when it arrives at the copy desk. So I sometimes have to call him at home in the evening when Pauline hands her column in late. If he has objections, he tells me to substitute TK, which means to come, for the offending passage. So one night, I decide that I should call him about her description of a scene in which a man butts his head into a woman's crotch. It's relatively mild, but why take chances when I'm still on such shaky ground? I don't like it, he says. Let me think. Vagina wouldn't work. He pauses a few more seconds and then adds, because that's the opening. Actually, he isn't the first to know about the head butting into the crotch, because when I first called, Mrs. Sean answered. I said, Mrs. Sean, this is Dan Menaker calling from the New Yorker. Oh, yes, Mr. Menaker, how are you? Fine, thank you. And you? Very well, thank you. How can I help you? Well, I'm copy editing Miss Kael's current cinema column, and there's something in it that I think Mr. Sean might object to. And as I think you know, he has asked me to call him under these circumstances. It's sort of marginal this time, but I thought I should check. Oh, a giggle. I'm sure you're right. Mr. Sean would want to know. He should be home very soon. But in the meantime, why don't you tell me what the trouble is? And I'll tell him the minute he walks in the door. Well, it's a little embarrassing. Maybe I should just talk to Mr. Sean, I say. You're married now, aren't you, Mr. Menaker? Yeah. Well, then I think it's perfectly all right for you to read the passage to me. This is something... Did I read this already? Sorry to be so scattered. This is earlier when I was a fact checker. There are 7 of us fact checkers, including Phil Pearl. He's the head. Phil slops around the place in that lazy-looking and fed-up way, but as I've said, he knows where to find anything in the reference books that line the metal shelves. Occasionally, a checker at wit's end or initiative's end will call out, "Room at large," and ask a question. Less than a week after I arrive at the New Yorker, one of my colleagues says, "Room at large. What does Angelino mean?" "Someone who lives in Los Angeles," I say. I feel as though I've just passed a test. Phil says, "It doesn't look like there's a lot in here," putting a tedious piece by E.J. Kahn about efforts to establish vocational schools in Micronesia down on my desk. Then he says, "Did you notice my shoes?" I say, "No, I haven't." And I look down and see shoes with colorful, layered heels, like alternating slices of Munster and beets. "Wow," I say, "those are some shoes." "You like them, huh? Guess how much they cost?" "Gee, I don't know. Must have been a lot. $70? $34.59, he says, heavy on the F's for emphasis. What a great deal, I say. Guess how much I paid for this shirt, he says. It would be burgundy with a strange sheen. Hey, it's a nice one. $39? Nope. $8. Canal Street. Wow, very special. The second week I am in checking, the phone on my desk rings and a miniature voice says, "Hello, is this Mr. Menaker?" "Yes." "Mr. Menaker, this is William Shawn." "Oh, hi, Mr. Shawn," I say. "What can I do for you?" "Well, there's a sentence in Notes and Comment about the number of troops who are in Vietnam right now, and I'd like you to check that with the State Department to make sure it's right. It's from a news story, and I don't know if it's reliable." The people on the Vietnam desk at the State Department always laugh when I check the reporter Robert Chaplin's Viet Cong body counts with them. They think the CIA feeds him inflated numbers. Jonathan Schell is writing powerful notes and comments against the war in the Talk of the Town, while Chaplin is writing semi-apologias for the war in the middle of the magazine. Schell is one of the Harvard crowd, one of Wallace Shawn's classmates. Shawn has hired 3 or 4 of them, Harvard undergraduates Hendrik Hertzberg, Jonathan Schell, Anthony Hiss. "Sure," I say, I'll do that. I'll check and I'll let you know." When I hang up, a few of the other checkers within earshot are staring at me. "What's wrong?" I say to the person who sits across from me. "You said hi to Mr. Shawn?" she says. "You don't say hi to Mr. Shawn. You say hello." Next to the copy desk is collating, where Ed Stringham is falling asleep and setting fire to his chair from time to time, and Mary Alice Rogers is swatting away, as she puts it. Then comes an editor, Mr. Whitaker, his office a hoarder's dream of train schedules and other railroad lore. He is a big Churchillian-looking man in his 60s who always wears colorful suspenders, a Princeton graduate, gay, I think. He fancies himself an acerb. He edits a lot of the magazine's columns, including The Racetrack, and himself appears in the Talk of the Town stories as Mr. Frimbo, a train buff whose doings are chronicled by Anthony Hiss, Wallace Shawn's fellow Harvard alum, the son of Alger Hiss. Mr. Whitaker is also known as Popsy. When I first started as a checker, I rode down in the elevator with the, to me, then still terrifying Popsy and stuttered out something about the day. Something about its being nice, I'm afraid. 19 floors went by in silence, and when we got out, he turned in the opposite direction from mine. Then I heard in Popsy's petulant voice, "Young man?" I turned around and said, "Yes, Mr. Whitaker?" "Young man, just to say, you certainly have a way with words." Next on the short east dogleg of the 19th floor come the Okayers, including eventually the aforementioned Kathy Black, who turned out to be my wife. These are the sort of sub-editors who read the final proofs of everything and ask questions, often important ones, as a fresh and very smart pair of eyes at the last minute. One of them, Helen, has tickets. That is, if a piece is closing and threatens to close late, she almost always raises a fuss, saying, "I have tickets." Often she takes the tickets out of her purse and brandishes them. Are they the same tickets each time, I wonder? The ritual being so predictable. And are they tickets at all? I actually think so, because Helen does indeed love music and does go to a lot of concerts. And then finally, a little bit later, okay, William Maxwell has invited me to try to be a fiction editor, and I'm working with him, and things are going better in general, and I'm selling some stories. But he's gone now, and I'm back on my own, even though I've been promoted. Shawn said to me, "It has been decided to give you an opportunity to be a fiction editor." And I thought, where does the ever-replenishing supply of the passive voice come from? Is there some bin that they sort of pick it out of and like it has been decided? I mean, who did this decision? Actually, it was probably blackmail because Maxwell had three or four editors had been asked to leave because of age, which was then legal. And I think Maxwell told me later that there was some legal or contractual question about it, and he said that he would go without protest if Sean gave me a chance to be an editor. So there was a little extortion involved. Maxwell accepted and published 5 short stories by me in a row, stories that were collected in Friends and Relations, a collection that a lot of critics had a lot of very grim fun with. After Maxwell leaves, my new editor, Frances Kiernan, rejects 13 submissions in a row over the course of 3 or 4 years. She is the titular head of the fiction department. I think her taste is generally questionable, but pretty much right in my case. I do manage to write some more humor for the magazine, parodies of Howard Cosell, Chinese communist propaganda, a Zen book about exercising called Running and Being, and so on, and some talk of the town pieces. But these successes do not succeed in making me feel less like the Pluto of the magazine's editorial solar system. For instance, during a transit strike, I hitchhike around Manhattan and write a notes and comment about it for the Talk of the Town section. The last part of the piece consists of an exchange between me and a fellow transportation improviser. "How are you getting around?" I ask him. "Diesel," he says. "Diesel," I say. He points to his feet and says, "Diesel get me anywhere." The piece appears in page proof the next day, a couple of days before Talk of the Town goes to press. The Diesel ending has disappeared. I'm not surprised, as I know that, like many people in publications, the New Yorker has a long-standing aversion to puns. But I thought this one was pretty good, and ironically somewhat aware of itself. I submit an author's proof to Sean, which courteously asks that the ending be reinstated. He calls me into his office and says, "Mr. Menaker, I see that you would like to restore the pun at the end of this talk piece." "Yeah," I say, "it seemed to me to rise above the usual objections." "I see," Sean says. "Well, I don't mean in any way to criticize you. You must believe me that this is not a judgment of you. You probably don't and can't understand why we can't do this. I really mean that. I don't expect you to know the full extent of the mistake this would be. You probably just aren't aware of it. But if we were to run the ending of this piece the way you're asking us to, it would destroy the magazine." That is not made up. I don't know. Is that enough? Should we have, I don't know, do you want to do some Q&A? A misplant? Sorry. I'm sorry to out you like that.
Going to ask was, how does being a professional editor influence your writing? But I'm also curious, what have you seen, or have you seen anything come off the slush pile and gone on to become something really successful?
That's the question that I think Deborah Treisman and I talked about when she was out here. Very seldom. I'd say when I was there, when I was a fiction editor, which was 1976 to 1995, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, an editorial assistant who would just be racing through the slush pile looking at, I think appropriately, at first paragraphs or first pages or 2 pages maybe. They'd find something and pass it on. The only example I can think of specifically offhand is a story called Our Last Breakfast at St. Augustine's Farm by a guy named Peter Marsh, which an assistant read and gave to me, and I liked it. And then we published another piece by Peter Marsh, and I believe then nothing else after that. And there was controversy about those 2 pieces. But though the slush pile remains evidently at least 250 to 300 a week, as Deborah said, and maybe more now because stuff can be submitted electronically. So you don't, that depressing thing of making a copy and getting the postage and getting a return envelope, and then the ultimate travail of getting postage for the return envelope. That's the thing that always used to drive me crazy. Not only did I have to send it in to be rejected or never even responded to, more likely, but I had to enclose a stamped self-addressed return envelope, which I would never see most of the time. So, no, I think, the suspicion that I'm sure most of you have that either in this course, as has happened, and at other MFA courses, and sometimes through family connections, and sometimes because somebody had a teacher, an undergraduate teacher who these things do have a way of sort of being filtered. And I think that sounds, unfortunate. It's as if you want to say, well, what about all those people who are really writing well who don't get the attention they should have? And my sense is, I've said this out here a number of times, my sense is that there are not a lot of undiscovered geniuses. One of the jobs of a writer or an artist is to get known. I mean, that's part of the job. Now, I will say this, I do think that promising and talented people can be frustrated and can be turned off completely by a very negative or sarcastic response or a very bad teacher or something. But I think talent will out most of the time. Anyway, short answer to your question is, I don't know. Deborah Treason could answer that question. I'm guessing once or twice a year. Anyone else? That's it? Yeah.
Can you describe your very first day at the New Yorker? Were you nervous? Were you?
I was
Were you?
I was kind of fucked up. I mean, no, I can't. I can tell you, I think maybe some of these stories I've told out here before, and if so, I feel sorry for myself and for you, and I apologize. But I remember something that happened very soon after I arrived, which was the appearance of the regular table of contents, and I was green enough so that I didn't know what an upheaval this was to the sort of staid old New Yorker. I had just learned practically to pronounce upheaval, which I thought until I was 14 was upheaval. So how did I know about the table of contents of the New Yorker? So here's what happened. So it comes through, and the checkers, we have a magazine on Monday called Stamped First Run Copy. It's very thrilling. So Sarah Lippincott, who ended up being head of the checking department, opens it up and says, "Oh, no." And everyone's gasping. Table of contents, oh God, no. There used to be a little table of contents that flew around, talk of the town, microscopically, and sometimes it lit here and sometimes it lit over here. But this was a real table of contents, sort of. And I was green enough. I said to Sarah, well, don't you think it's a good idea what the readers know what's in the magazine? And she said, it's none of the readers' business what's in the magazine. So it sounds like a crazy fun house, and it sort of was, but, a tremendous amount of great work was done. So these are just the sort of anecdotes on the corners of very, very hard work. Checking was hard work. Editing was hard work. People worked a lot. But the staff was plenitudinous enough so that it wasn't 12 hours a day, as it is now. It was more like 6 or 7. And then certain people would shut the door and have sex with certain other people and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I'm curious because the New Yorker is such a clearly odd and unusual environment. Why there are so few books? I mean, yours and I think Brendan Gill's book. And
There's a lot.
there are?
It's about 10.
Oh, there are.
Yeah. But except for Brendan Gill's, which I admire, and which is in some ways a model for, although very different in structure, but it has the same somewhat skeptical, distant eye. They're all wacko.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Lillian Ross, who wrote about Sean. She was his mistress. The name of the book was Here But Not Here. Renata Adler wrote a book, which was cranky in its own way. Benya Goda wrote a very good book about the New Yorker, and Thomas Kunkel wrote a good book about the New Yorker. They were both outsiders, which is not to say they shouldn't have done it. In fact, they're quite good, but it didn't have the same deep knowledge that Brendan Gill had. I mean, that's a wonderful book. But there are a lot. There are others. Ved Mehta, the blind Indian writer, wrote a book about, an idolatrous book about Sean. Here's a story about Ved Mehta. So Ved Mehta would say to me things like, Dan, the new receptionist on 20, is she pretty? And I would say, yes, very pretty. And we would have these conversations. But once when I told him, because a lot of people had pressed the buttons on the elevator, so when we came to his floor, which was 19, my floor was 20 at the time, I made the mistake of saying, Ved, it's 19. He said, yes, I know. He was very, very defensive about his vision. So he had an assistant named Lisa Sloan, who was very funny, very smart person. I think she became a lawyer after a while. And she lasted longer with Ved than his assistants came and went. She lasted longer with him than just about anybody else. And they developed a kind of sort of exchange of sarcasm and jokes and so on. And Lisa smoked, as all of us did. And Ved, who had quite a nose, as you might expect, was always criticizing her and saying, Lisa, you must stop smoking. Lisa, I can tell you've been smoking, and so on and so forth. So finally she stopped smoking, not because of him, but because she stopped smoking. And he's very pleased. He said, Lisa, I can tell you have stopped smoking. That's wonderful. Congratulations. She says, thank you very much. And then she broke up with her boyfriend or something happened. She started smoking again. And she came into the office after a weekend of smoking, and Ved said, oh, Lisa, I can tell you have been smoking again. I am very disappointed. And he said, as she said to him, haven't you ever tried to stop a habit and had a hard time doing it? And he said, yes, masturbation when I was 13, and I succeeded. And she said, well, it didn't do you any good. You went blind anyway. And evidently, he almost fell out of his chair laughing, to his credit. Yeah.
You would think that from your perspective now that, well, given that a magazine, when its editors change, a certain character changes, but do you think fundamentally the New Yorker is still the New Yorker?
I don't think it could be. And I think the answer is no. When the New Yorker was first published, the population of the United States was barely above 100 million. And it had a chance for cultural centrality, which Harold Ross and then Sean made the most of, because the country was in some ways still kind of raw and unsophisticated. So a kind of sophisticated, funny magazine coming out of New York with a kind of droll approach to life and a somewhat superior metropolitan attitude sort of caught on with people everywhere, not only in New York City. And that cohesiveness remained in place, I'd say, until maybe the mid-'80s or late '80s. And then the magazine had to change. Bob Gottlieb, when he came to Newhouse, told Sean that he would never fire him. And technically, he never did. After Newhouse acquired the magazine, which is a story in itself, he finally said to Sean, you must give me a date when you're going to leave. He didn't fire him, but he did. And so Sean finally named a date, and Bob Gottlieb came in. The internet was just beginning. Ad revenues were beginning to decline. Bob maintained the financial status of the magazine pretty well. He was, I think, somewhat intimidated by the anger at which was directed at him and Newhouse because of the autocratic way that the transition was made. But as I say in the book, I mean, Newhouse owned it. He could do what he wanted. I mean, there was a lot of idealistic, oh, this is a terrible thing and so on, but in fact, that's capitalism. The man owned the property, and he could build a chimney on it if he wanted to. So Bob came in, and I think the idea of that centrality as the population expanded, as the internet expanded, I think it became harder and harder to hold on to. I think it still has a fair amount, and I think David Remnick is doing a good job. But also, I think the difficulty of publishing, this is crucial and something I don't think anyone else but me has thought about. The availability of multi-part long pieces, like The Silent Spring, like The Fate of the Earth, like The Greening of America, like, and full-length novellas like Philip Roth's and William Maxwell's So Long, See You Tomorrow. I mean, there were kind of crazy chances that the magazine took, especially about length. And I think now they can't do that. And I think that's unfortunate. I think David Remnick should do that. I mean, I think it would be interesting to say, okay, we found something amazing. We're going to devote more than half the magazine to it. And I think multi-part pieces might work, but that just could be anachronistic. The short answer to your question is, it's not still the same magazine. It's been changed. I mean, there was the 4 years of Tina Brown, which was very chaotic. And I think Remnick has settled it down. And every week there's something good in it. But every single week. And sometimes surprising, but not often enough surprising, I think.
Standards in general, those of us who have been journalists always look to it as holding up as the representatives of.
It's still very carefully put together, yeah. Which is amazing when you think it's a weekly. It's still very careful. Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you very much.